Hey AP Psych friends, welcome to part 2 of our unit on personality, Unit 10. This section is on two separate theories, humanism and the trait approach. And so let's start with the humanistic approach. If you think back to Unit 1 when we were talking about the different psychological perspectives, honestly, Unit 1 is sometimes challenging for us because we don't really have any context in which to put these theories. So this should really help you now in that, if you recall, humanism is going to be the movement in psychology where we place the emphasis on the individual. And so this theory, if you remember, in general just emphasizes the great potential that each of us as humans possesses. Two of your big theorists under this theory would be Abraham Maslow. Perhaps you've learned about him in either a health class or if you've taken sociology. Remember that Maslow said that we have a hierarchy of needs, right, with our physiological needs like food and water and shelter being at the bottom level of the hierarchy. And then we move up the chain of command, safety, love, and belongingness. And eventually at the tippy top is self-actualization, which is really just being the best possible person that you can be. And so Maslow's used a lot, especially in the field of education, in that it's very hard for students to reach their full potential, or for any of us to be the best personality that we can be, if we're feeling safe, or we're hungry, or we're without our basic needs being fulfilled. Carl Rogers is going to talk about your self-concept, which is just your view of yourself as an individual, like a unique person separate from all others. And our goal, right, is to have congruence, or to be genuine. And so my actions and my beliefs about who I am, right, my self-concept should be congruent. They should be the same. And that when we do that, we don't have anxiety, we don't have stress, right? Think of, the famous, Shakespeare quote, right, "To thine own self be true." Rogers says you'll be happier that way. Of course, we should be accepting of others, even when they make mistakes. And that's what Rogers called unconditional positive regard, right? That, even if, my child messes up, it's you made a mistake, but that doesn't change the fact that I still love you as a human being. And being empathetic towards others. Rogers would say that if you are true to yourself, you're empathetic towards others, and you're accepting of people despite their faults, that you will flourish as a human being. And so whether you take Maslow's approach or Rogers' approach, the humanistic perspective is saying that our personalities come from, our quest to be the best person that we can be. Obviously the humanistic approach involves a lot of assessing oneself. There really aren't going to be any tried and true tests per se. Like under psychoanalysis, we had projective tests such as Rorschach ink blots or the thematic apperception test. The humanistic approach probably isn't going to rely on any sort of quantitative analysis of one's personality. It's really just your personal quest for self-actualization, or to be genuine to your self-concept. This is a great approach in that it gives a lot of control and power back to the individual, which is somewhat refreshing. Remember that this is coming out of that, cognitive revolution of the 60s. Well, obviously Maslow's writing prior to that time, but it really catches on in the field of psychology then. And this is great, right? That I'm not just a product of my environment, as Skinner says, right? I'm not just the drooling dog in Pavlov's experiment, that I actually have a say in who I am as an individual. But obviously, it's limited in the fact that it says that everything is within my power. And clearly, if we're to be realistic, we know that environmental or external influences, do have some effect on our development as an individual. Okay, so then the second theory to mention here is the trait approach. Okay, a trait is just going to be a personality quality that makes us, the combination of traits make us unique from other individuals. Okay, Gordon Allport is an individual that you should really know regarding this theory, okay, he actually, in his free time, right, sat and cataloged like thousands of adjectives out of the dictionary as a way to kind of, I just categorize or organize personality traits. So he's like one of the founders of this theory. We also have the Eysenck family that is coming up with a factor analysis that we can look at people on these two different dimensions, right? Whether or not a person is emotionally stable or emotionally unstable. And so when Allport is focusing on like thousands of individual traits and whether or not we possess them or not, don't possess them, obviously Eysenck is looking at whether or not we fall within these more general dimensions. So, right, unstable and stable, and introverted versus extroverted. Okay. Biology and personality obviously play a role, right? We can talk about, genetic traits that maybe are passed down from generation to generation, or having a similar sense of humor to that of your family, a family member. But I don't want you to think that the trait approach is only talking about things coming from our genetics. That's just one part of the trait approach. We'll talk about that on that last bullet there of evaluating the trait approach. But a common mistake that intro to psych students make is thinking, trait approach, that just means you inherit your traits. That would be oversimplifying the perspective. Okay, so how can we assess traits? We can look at the big five in personality. And so researchers have developed what's known as the big five personality factors. Actually, when we come, one day we're going to travel to the library where you'll have an opportunity to take a big five personality test. We'll assess your own personality. But it's easy to remember with the acronym CANOE, right? And so you fall on these different dimensions, right? On conscientiousness is what the C is. Right, so how meticulous or careful are you? Are you organized? Are you disciplined? Or are you more careless and impulsive? The A stands for agreeableness. Right, are you trusting? Are you helpful? Are you kind of more suspicious and uncooperative? The N stands for neuroticism. I don't want you to necessarily equate neuroticism with, craziness, but think more on the lines of emotional stability versus instability, right? Are you calm? Are you secure? Or are you more anxious and insecure? Openness is your O, right? Are you more imaginative and independent, or are you kind of more practical and conforming? And then your E in CANOE is extroversion. Are you more of an affectionate, sociable person, or are you kind of more of a reserved introvert? And so that can be a test that you use to assess one's traits and how they fall on the big five dimensions. Two other ones that are pretty popular are the MBTI, the Myers-Briggs type inventory, which actually is going to use Jungian descriptions of personality and to see how you score on that objective test, which we'll do a sample of one of those as well. And then the MMPI is the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory that was originally used to determine emotional stability. Not so much for that point anymore, but a lot of employers like to use the MMPI to determine whether or not you'd be a good fit for their company, right? Because the MMPI is empirically derived, meaning that the information comes from years and years and years of collecting data, and so it tends to be kind of a neat way for an employer to see how you'll fit into a team dynamic. All right, so to evaluate this approach, obviously. This is really cool, right? In that we're cataloging and documenting and labeling, people with specific traits that make them unique individuals. The problem with this approach, though, is going to be that the trait theorists aren't really concerned from where your traits come, right? Like, remember I said that biology and personality is just a small portion of this perspective. And so they couldn't, they really couldn't care less about that. They're just more concerned with describing who you are. So thanks for listening, and bring any questions that you have with you concerning humanism and the trade approach to class.